For the installation of this crossmember back exhaust system, we're going to be working with a 1967 Shelby GT500. In this particular case, we're going to show the versatility of the system and how it can be used with aftermarket headers, different crossmembers, subframe connectors, and look at the exit options. On this car, we're going to be working with the factory cutout provisions in the lower rear valance. Let's take a moment to look at all the parts that make up this complete exhaust system, the first of which is the inlet pipes. Now these are trimmed to fit. They can be used with our manifold pipe selections, aftermarket headers, or modified to fit your factory downpipes and stock manifolds. Immediately following is our TRU-X crossover, our mirror finished stainless steel polished mufflers, the tailpipes, the tailpipe extensions and tips, the instruction manual, as well as a hardware kit. The first step in this installation is going to be placing a clamp over the inlet side of both of the mufflers. Each muffler is then placed on the outlet side of the TRU-X crossover assembly. These clamps should be tightened just enough to keep the mufflers from falling off the X-pipe assembly. Later in the video, you'll see we'll install this as one complete unit. Now it's time to install the muffler hangers. Note the position as each one of these faces the outside of the frame. These should bolt on directly to the factory provisions both on passenger and driver's side. When on the driver's side, make note of things such as brake lines or differential vents and make sure that you're clear of anything before you finish the installation. Next, we're going to install the hanger isolators. You can lightly lubricate these and place these on top of the muffler hangers to prepare the whole assembly to be installed on the vehicle. With the vehicle safely supported on jack stands or using a lift, we're going to go ahead and install the complete muffler and X-pipe assembly. Whenever using rubber hangers, don't forget to provide a little lubrication to make it easy to install. With that said, we're going to go ahead and swing up that complete assembly and make sure that it clears the drive shaft and place it in its final resting position. The use of a stand or an additional holder will help keep this in place until we're finished. Take a moment now to look at the mufflers and make sure that everything's level from the back of the vehicle. This will ensure that our tailpipes line up and everything looks right as well. Moving on to the tailpipes, we're going to slide the driver's side pipe over the axle, put a clamp on, and install it to the back of the muffler. At this point, we want to loosely adjust everything to make sure we're clear of brake lines, differential vents, gas tanks, and ensure that the back of the tailpipe is aimed at the cutout that we have at the back of the vehicle. The passenger side is the same. We install the pipe over the axle, slide the clamp over the pipe, and put the clamp over the rear outlet of the muffler. Again, everything is loose enough that we can adjust for the axle and the gas tank. When installing the front pipes, we're going to have to take in consideration a couple different things. First and foremost, though, we need a starting point and an ending point. So we're going to go ahead and install the ball flare flange that came with the aftermarket headers, and this will be our starting point. We'll have to take in consideration where the end pipe is, and for fitment, we're going to have to look at just how much we're going to trim. In this particular case, we'll make note of things such as a crossmember that might come in the way. This header, along with many other aftermarket headers, do not follow the stock exhaust routing. In this case, we'll have to make some modifications to the front pipe by cutting along the measured points and adding additional bends with another piece of pipe. In order to clear the crossmember and mate to the aftermarket header, we're going to use a second piece of pipe and cut through the center of the bend. This will give us the S that we need to clear the crossmember. After this, we'll have to assemble the pipes underneath the car, mark the relative positions, and come back and assemble these on the bench. We'll show you this immediately following. With each of the segments marked, we're going to assemble the inlet pipe, the S-bend that we've created, and the ball flare flange that came with the headers to get our final part. With the welding completed on the inlet pipe, we can slide the back section into the TRU-X assembly and mate the front section to the back of the header to the ball flare flange. For proper fitment and alignment, it will be necessary to ensure that there's no movement between the front pipe and the header. These two joints can be placed finger tight, so there's a little bit of movement, but not enough to allow the whole system to fall out of adjustment. For the driver's side, we're going to repeat the same process. Slide on your clamp, fit the pipe, and ensure everything mates up to the ball flare flange. Again, put your bolts in, snug up the system so nothing falls out of alignment. With the center section supported by the stand, it's time to lock the front pipes into position. Do this by simply tightening the two clamps to the front pipes, ensuring that the drive shaft has clearance around the X. As you work your way to the back, we want to make sure the mufflers are still in place. Adjust each of the mufflers, then lock them in place again by tightening the clamps in front. This will ensure that the tailpipe alignment is correct when we're finished with the installation. Moving to the back of the vehicle, we're going to go ahead and install a clamp, the tailpipe tip extension, and the tip itself. Visually, we're going to compare the cutout to the tip location to make sure everything is still aligned correctly. At this time, we're not going to tighten any of the clamps, but we will make sure that there's proper spacing between the rear leaf spring and the tip. The use of a spacer will help align everything and ensure that there's proper clearances. With the tailpipe in place, we need to mock up the position of the hanger on the frame relative to the tailpipe. With that said, we're going to mark where we're going to bend, and any excess material we're going to need to cut off. The hanger fabrication is pretty simple. Here, our first mark is where we're going to bend. We're going to simply lock it in the vise and smack it with a hammer a few times to get the appropriate bend angle. Once that's done, we can compare it to the vehicle to make sure that it's going to fit the right way. With the isolator installed, we're going to use the supplied hardware to mount the bracket to the frame. Once the bracket is installed in this position, we're going to make sure that it contacts the pipe. Take a moment to look at the tip and make sure that it fits the cutout correctly. Once the bracket and the pipe are fitted correctly, it's time to place a tack weld to hold it in this position. Having completed the passenger side, the driver's side is much of the same. We'll start off with basic assembly, clamp, tailpipe extension, and tip, and then we'll adjust the tailpipe to make sure there's adequate clearance for the shock, the differential, and the gas tank. With the tailpipe in place, we want to make sure the tip alignment is correct to the cutout. Again, using a spacer, you can hold it in place while adjusting the rest of the system. Fabrication of the bracket is the same as the other side. Once in position, we want to make sure that it contacts the pipe, we adjust the tip and prepare everything for tack welding. Make sure you take all the safety precautions necessary whenever you're welding near a gas tank. Before we can finish this installation, we need to make sure that we have all the same clearances we verified when we were assembling all the components. Starting at the front of the vehicle at the ball flare flange, we'll tighten the bolts down and ensure that we still have the proper clearance around the crossmember. Working through the TRU-X assembly, we want to make sure the drive shaft as well is not touching or making any contact, keeping in mind though that the drive shaft is in its lowest position as the suspension is in full droop. Working our way through the mufflers and tailpipes, we want to ensure that all the clearances we adjusted for initially are still intact. This means double checking things such as brake lines, the axle vent tube, anything that might come in the way through normal suspension articulation. Throughout the installation, we spent a good deal of time adjusting and readjusting. The whole point of this was to make sure that the tips come out in the final location looking the way they're supposed to. With some finish welding for the tips and the tailpipe connection brackets, this will conclude your installation of the TRU-X crossmember back system.